wall. Much of it has collapsed many times when there are earthquakes. And guess what? The next earthquake is going to collapse. It could be tomorrow. I say this on every single tour. I've been guiding for over 20 years.
So
one day, the next day, there was a tour guide that said, "You're a prophet."
One of these times we're
That's, I guess,
right.
how prophecy works. Because like, you said there was going to be, and they called me up. They were frantic.
You're on the right track.
I say it every day. The wall didn't fall down. By the way, this wall didn't fall down. A piece of the wall on the other side did fall down. And that is why they had to redo things on the... Anyway, but that was crazy. Anyway, there will be another earthquake, by the way. Okay, we expect an earthquake in this region every 150 years. The last really big one was 1837. So, yeah. So
it's the time, I think. It's the time.
So get ready. So anytime you see a really ugly building, what should you say?
Stay away.
I hope nobody's going to be inside. Okay. Next. Okay, so let's look over here. We have what's now. If you look at the course that was about where ground level was here, was doubled. Do you see how it was doubled? No. Yes. Over there, look over there. You see? Mm-hmm. And that's why it was so strong that basically everything collapsed until that course, except for where the gates are, and everything else has been rebuilt. Sometimes with original stones, original Rhodian stones, but mostly with smaller stones. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the original courses of Temple Mount are only up until here. This is them right here, from Herodian Temple Mount. The original courses of course of road stones is called the course. Okay, so this is now. It's here. I said it's double, and you can see. What do you see here? It is beautifully decorated. So what we have here, though, is 3 doorways. Do you see that? Which were probably squared off on top, because that's the way they were described in the rabbinic sources and in Josephus, right here. Okay, and these are all smaller stones that fill up in between. Okay, and then there's another large stone over here. So these stones were probably the original Herodian, and all these were filled in. Okay, so we have 3 gates here, and we have 2 gates over there. Some have been covered over. We'll talk about that later. Now, what are our sources? Everybody take a step back. Don't fall in, but take a step back. Now, we have 4 sources about the way Temple Mount looks. One is, let's see if you can guess. What? Josephus, great. Josephus, by the way, Josephus describes the Temple Mount in 2 places, and not all the details are the same. Okay, but Josephus will use as one source. What's another source?
The Romans.
What?
The Romans, maybe. The
Romans,
document.
Josephus and the Romans. There are not too many places. What? Okay, the rabbinic sources, particularly in the tractate of Midot, not Tamid, Midot. Midot is an entire tractate that gives us dimensions of the Temple Mount and all the sanctuaries and all the chambers and everything like that. And I'm going to quote from it in a second. Okay? What other source do we have?
Bible.
What we can see with our eyes. Okay? Okay? And we have, the 4 is assorted, accumulated sources outside. And we assume we have so many sources describing one event, it means that what? Everything will make sense and work together. Guess what? No. They're all different, including the 2 different sources in Josephus himself. So that one could be easily explained, and that's something that also appears in the New Testament, which, by the way, also has a few references of Temple Mount. The steps itself is one of the places that Jesus preached, and therefore Christian groups will be coming here, especially evangelicals. This is one of the most special places on their trip. One of the things that Israel Levine, that's my teacher, who he tried to say that Josephus described that the temple wasn't completed at the time of Herod, and that was continuously built and added to and changed up until the destruction, and really was never ever finished completely. And that may explain why there's slightly different explanations and the dimensions, so on. That can only explain a fraction of the problems. There's one key problem. And it is I'm not going to get every single aspect of it, but it has to do with the amounts of gates. How many gates are around Temple Mount today?
7.
Around 9. Okay, 4 on this side, 2 on this side, if you could count this 2, and then 2 on this side, lions, and the one that's closed, and then you have Herod's Gate, Damascus Gate, and
Jaffa
so on.
Gate,
And then the new gate doesn't count. Okay,
9
because-
gates?
Sorry, what?
I thought
9
seven.
functional
On
gates.
functional gates. I don't want one closed,
No,
but it could have
8
been
functional,
open.
9
On
gates.
Temple Mount. It's not Herod's gate. Sorry, the northern gate. Let's say the gate of Israel and so on. And now, the gates around Temple Mount, most of them are the original gates that were there. And again, 4 on the outside. The Mishnah, which apparently is describing the Second Temple period, says there were 5 gates. The 2 gates on the south, were used for entry and exit. Okay, this, by the way, was the entry. Exit was over there. We'll describe that in a second. There was a gate on the south called Shar Shoshan, Shar Tedi, and Shar Kipanos. And these were called Shnei Sharei Hulda, Minadaron. Hulda is the same name of the prophetess, the woman prophet, that according to somebody was buried right over here. I don't think that makes any sense. Okay? But why else would you call these gates Hulda? What is a Hulda? Hulda is a burrowing animal, like a hedgehog, which means that how do you come into these gates? You go in, and what do? You climb up a set of stairs, and you arrive at Temple Mount after you go up the stairs, just like a Hulda. So that could be a better explanation of what a Hulda is. Now,
الحيوان اللي
that only
ياكل
be part of the explanation
Khuld.
of what these gates
Khuld.
are, because we find the dimensions of
button.
Temple Mount very different in the Mishnah and in Josephus. And what we see here, in the Mishnah it says Harabayit was 500 amot, which is a cubit, it was a square of 500 cubits on 500 cubits. But that's not what we see today. Today it's like an oblong rectangle, much larger. How big is a cubit? So the cubit, by the way, is somewhere between 47 centimeters and 57 or maybe even 60 centimeters. Okay? So it depends. Where do we measure it from and which cubit do you use? Now, it can be very confusing, and at 4:42 at the end of the day, I'm not going to go into all the details. What I will tell you, though, is that we do have a square. We'll call it the Rittmeyer square. Remember I mentioned Lean Rittmeyer? And that is a square that surrounds the Temple Mount of today. Of where most assume that the Dome of the Rock is where the temple stood. Some of us think the actual rock is not the place of the sanctuary, but rather the place of the altar. Again, I don't have time. Oren will expand on this in the classroom. It's way too complicated for now, but that's one of the theories that makes a little bit more sense. I'll just say that if you use the dimensions based on this, if you put the temple on the Holy of Holies where the rock is, the temple is really too far to the east. It's in a very obscure and a uncomfortable location. If it's a place of the altar, it makes a lot more sense, but it could be either way. I'm not making any decisions on where it was. Okay, nobody really cares what I think. It was where it was. Now, one of the ways to harmonize the sources is to say the Mishnah does not necessarily represent the reality at the time of Herod or the destruction. Rather, the Mishnah may include or be predominantly giving over information that relates to which temple? The Hasmonean temple. And maybe they saw the additions that were made in the time of Herod, even though they're important and they're special and they might have been beautiful, they may not have been sanctified. They may not have been holy. And if they were not deemed holy, they may not be deemed worthy of the descriptions in this ideal law book. Okay? And therefore, the 5 gates described were the gates in the Hasmonean edition. Herod, as you learned or will learn, expanded on Temple Mount in 3 directions. The western side, the northern side, the southern side, the eastern side more or less stayed the same. If you walk along the southern side, the western side, you walk along the eastern side, you walk along the eastern side, some of those stones could be Nehemiah and could be First Temple. Okay? But these stones were all expanded upon at the time of Herod, which means that the original Hulda gates could be the gates that are about 5, 6, 7 meters further in. No, further in. Which there were. Okay?
Closer.
Now, I'm really sorry I didn't bring any of my pictures, but
Yeah, we found a lintel in there, lintel that
Yes.
says Hulda or Hulda.
no, we didn't find a lintel that says Cordo. We did find other inscriptions. Okay, there are
So
3
that's
or
one
4
reason that
other
clarifies.
inscriptions that we found. One inscription that was found is in Greek, and it says non-Jews do not pass beyond this point. And we found 2 pieces of them, which were inside in the sanctuary, and that was the area that the non-Jews could only come up to. Another one is a dedicatory plaque from the Jewish community of Rhodes. By the way, Rhodes is burning down right now. Yes, they're evacuating the entire Rhodes. There's a terrible, terrible fire. Israel has sent help there, by the way. We're helping out. Right now, don't visit Rhodes. Okay? Go to Rhodes, go to
Natural cause?
and I don't know. It's so hot and so dry. It's having a terrible time. There was a Jewish community there in the Second Temple period, and they were wealthy people, and they donated part of the floor. And that's in the dedicatory plaque in part of the floor. I could keep this for many, many times. I'm going to point to what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to talk about the other gates and the importance of Christianity. I'm going to give you an overview of what's in this part, and then we're going to walk to the building and just run through the museum before this is done. Okay, so you just get a sense of what's there, so you're ready for your homework to come back and complete the story. With tourists, you will not do any of this stuff. Okay, with tourists, you will come in, and for 10 minutes, you'll talk, if it's a Christian group, you'll talk about the Jesus preaching on the steps, you'll talk about the prayer of the Mount, we talk about Jesus on Temple Mount, and that's it. With a Jewish group, you will come here, you'll talk about, you'll take out the Mishnah, you'll read the different sources, one that I'll tell right now, and then you'll basically go. You'll see, it's part of the day, you don't have time. What are you missing that's really interesting? Before that, let's get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kol hanichnasim la'arabai, nichnasim min ha-mizrach. You enter through these gates, and you loop around Temple Mount, and you come out through those gates. And that's why this is narrow, and that you pay your half shekel coin, and you go in with your thing, and you come around. Their area is what? Is wide and spread out. That's everybody coming out. That's where you had your kiddush, and that's where you were schmoozing and talking, and everybody would be like that. You'd let your hair down over there. That's where it would be much more casual. Here, people are very solemnly going into Temple Mount. That's everybody coming out. 2 types of people would go in the opposite direction. One is mourners. Mourners would go in, and everybody would see that your garment was torn, and everybody would say, you shall be comforted. It's just the way we comfort mourners until today, by this place and by God and by the people of Jerusalem. And that would be that way. The other groups of people that are those that are those that have been exorcised, meaning people that have been sent out of the community because of bad things that they did or crimes they've committed, and people would say to you, may God make you repent and come back or whatever, or there's actually there are 2 different languages of how you would tell them that you should be worthy of repentance and you should not be in your sinning ways anymore, but they weren't allowed to come in the regular entrance. Okay, so that was over there. The only way you know the difference is who would have their garment torn. Anyway, that was some of the things that are, and there are many more